Masechet Ketubot, Daf Pe Zayin. The Mishnah at the end of the daf yesterday was talking about a husband who offers his wife an oath waiver. I will not make you have an oath, and he puts that in the ketuvah. And we saw a few different scenarios of the exact language. If he says, I will not make you make an oath, but then he can make her inheritors vow, unless he uses more specific language. And even if he says, I won't make you vow, but his inheritors can make a vow, unless he uses other specific language that no one's going to make anyone vow. All right, the opening questions are going to be exactly what is the nature of this vow. But the end of the Mishnah, which is also going to come into play today, was talking about after he dies, the husband dies, if she goes straight to her father, her own family's house, or even if she goes home but she's not appointed a steward, then the inheritors of the father of the husband cannot force her to vow. But if the wife was appointed as the administrator over the estate, then the inheritors can make her make a vow. We'll talk more about that as well. Okay, so we begin the question. Shevuah mai abidata. When it says here in the opening that the husband can issues an oath waiver, what kind of oath are we talking about? We saw earlier that a husband can't just for any reason go make his wife take a vow. There was the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who thought that yes, a husband can make his wife take a vow even about dough. But Tanna Kama did not say that. He said he can only make her take a vow if she's going to be the storekeeper or the stewardess over the estate. So when it says here in the Mishnah that the husband gives this oath waiver, what kind of oath would she have to take if not for this oath waiver? We have two opinions. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Al apotropia shenaasit bechaye ba'ala. It is in fact about the case where she became a steward over his property during his lifetime, and then he has the right to make her vow. But if he writes in the ketubah, I released you from vows that will come up, should they come up during the marriage. So it's talking about this type of vow. Rav Nachman Amar bar Abu ala pogemet ketubata. Rav Nachman says no, it's talking about a vow that we're about to see in the very next Mishnah on this stuff, which says that when she comes to collect her ketuvah, if she admits that she did receive partial payment, then she impairs the power of the ketuvah. That's pogemet ketuvata, and to collect the rest of it, she has to make a vow. We're talking about that type of vow. If the husband at the beginning of the marriage releases her from that vow, then she will not have to make the vow, even if she admits to receiving partial payment. All right, that's the two opinions. And now we're going to reject one of them. Azal Rab Mordechai Amara Lishma Ata Kamed Rab Asher. Rab Mordechai said the following in front of Rab Asher. Bishlama lemanda amar ala pogemet ketubata demaseka adata dilma mistarche le zuze veshakilna meketubatai v'amra le ketob li dela mishtabat li. I says I understand the second opinion of Rav Nachman, who says that it's talking about a case where she impairs her ketubah. At the beginning of the marriage, the idea is raised in her mind, says, I may need an advanced payment. I may need some cash. And then I'll take the money for my ketubah in advance. I'll receive partial payment for my ketuvah, and then and she will tell him, write for me that I don't have to vow. Since at the beginning of the marriage, there's a strong likelihood that she may want a cash advance, and she doesn't want to have to vow at the end when she comes to collect the rest of her ketubah. So it makes sense that a woman would foresee this happening and ask the husband to release her of vows. I got that. Rav Nachman makes sense. But according to the first opinion, that of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, that we're talking about a case where she is made into an administrator over his properties during his lifetime, and in that case, yes, normally he can make her take vows. Ihi mi havat yadana demotiv la apotropia. Do you think she knew that he would ask her to be the administrator? Damra le ketov li de la mashpat li, and she would foresee that happening, and therefore say, "Hey, can you write for me that you release me from vows? Should I be an administrator?" This is an unlikely scenario. Most of the time, husbands do not ask their wives to be administrators over the property, so it's not something that she would foresee. So it doesn't really make sense that she would ask him to write this in the ketuvah. So the first case is likely. The second one is not likely, and therefore the answer of Rav Yehuda Amarav doesn't make sense. That's what Mordechai asks Rav Asher. Rav Asher answers, Amarle, Atuna hamatnitu la, anana hamatninan la. Rav Asher says, oh, you applied Rav Yehuda's statement to the Resha of the Mishnah. We learned it regarding the Sefa. What we see here is that a lot of times statements of Amoraim that are a commentary on the Mishnah, sometimes it's not clear at what line of the Mishnah it actually applies to, and so it could move around, and it makes a big difference in the meaning. So Rav Asher says Rav Yehuda was not talking about the opening of the Mishnah. In the opening of the Mishnah, that a husband can issue a waiver, that in fact was talking about an impaired ketubah, and everyone agrees with that, with Rav Nachman. Even Rav Yehuda would agree with Rav Nachman. What Rav Yehuda said, he was talking about the end of the Mishnah. Halcha mikebed ba'ala lebet aviha o shechazra lebet chamia velo naset apotropia. If a wife goes directly from the cemetery to her own father's house, or even if she returns to her her in-law's house, but she's never made an administrator, then the heirs of the husband cannot make her take a vow. She did not have access to the property, so she has nothing to defend. But if she was made an administrator, then there is suspicion that maybe she mishandled some of the property. So Yorshin mashpi'in ota al atid lavo. Then the inheritors can make her vow about what will happen in the future. So this is not actually about the future, but it means from some point and on, either from death on or from the burial on. That's what we're going to talk about. But they cannot make her make a vow what happened earlier, what happened before that. So when exactly is the future and when is exactly the past that he cannot make a vow? Shavad, my avidite. What do you mean? What past? Or why would he have to? How could the inheritors make her take a vow about something that happened way in the past? Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav al apotropia shenaset bechaye habaal. So this is the statement. Rav Yehuda Amarav, when he said the statement, he wasn't talking about the beginning of the Mishnah, but rather about this line, that the past means if during his lifetime, while he was alive, he made her the administrator, then even though the husband can make a vow that she's doing the administration well, his heirs cannot go and make her take a vow about the past when she was an administrator. Maybe you think that they could because the father could, so maybe they could also. No, and about the past, that's talking about when she was an administrator during his lifetime. But aval ben mitalik vura mashpi'inan la. However, from the time of death, and from even between the time of death and burial, for sure after the time of burial, but even during that in-between time, the heirs can, in fact, make her take a vow. So that's the key. The reason why Rav Yehuda says the past is talking about when he was alive and she was an administrator, is so that they could say future starts earlier than another opinion that we're going to see says. During that period between the death and the burial, she has to go and she has to pay for expenses regarding the burial. And so, did she do so honestly? The heirs have a right to make her vow that she did. Rav Matana Amar, afilu ben mita likvura lo mashpi'inan la. Whereas this opinion of Rav disagrees with Rav Matana. They say that even between death and burial, they cannot make her take a vow. Because they say, after all, in Nehar De'ah, that regarding the head tax that has to be paid for the members of the family, or the sustenance that has to be given to the wife and the children, and the expenses for the burial, we sell property without an announcement. Normally, if you want to sell property that is part of an estate that belongs to heirs, you have to make the court has to make a public announcement, wait 30 days, make sure that it's being sold for the highest bidder. But in this short time period between death and burial, there's no time for all that, and therefore the court administrating the estate has a right to sell immediately without announcement. So too the wife, if she's in charge of paying for the burial, paying for those expenses during that in-between time, we don't make her take a vow, because we know that this is a crunch time, and we just like we don't make an announcement, we're not so particular, so we can't be so particular and make her take a vow, so there's no vow. So this is a machloket between Rav Yehuda and Rav Matana about that in-between time, whether she makes a vow between about her administration of the finances between the death and the burial. But both of these sages would agree with Rav Nachman and regarding the first clause, that when the husband gives the oath waiver, that's talking about an oath for an impaired ketubah. Okay, good. And now we're going to see some other formulations. The Mishnah mentioned a few formulations where he says, I will not give you a vow, I will not issue a vow to you or your inheritors, I and my inheritors won't make you take a vow, and so on. So what about some other ambiguous statements? Amar Rabba Amar Rabbi Chaya, Delo neder udelo shibu'ah. If a man says, we're going to get married, and there will be no vow and no oath. In that case, it means hu eno yachol hashpiah. He cannot administer an oath to her, but aval yorshin mashpinota. But his inheritors can, because he just says, I'm not going to give you an oath, but it doesn't say anything about his heirs. And naki shibu'ah, if he says, you are clear from vows, you are clear from oaths, then ben yorshin and mashpinota, that means he and his heirs cannot make her take a vow. Because the word clear means you are clear from oaths no matter what. No matter who's asking you. Rav Yosef ve'amar Rabbi Chaya. That was one version of Rabbi Chaya in the name of Rabbah. But Rav Yosef said a different version of what Rabbi Chaya said. The first half is the same. If he says, I'm not going to take you will have no vow or no oath, then the husband cannot make her take an oath, but the inheritors, they didn't agree to that, so they can. If he says you are clear from oath, clear from vows, then both he and his inheritors can make her take a vow. Why? Because this language of clear means clear your name of any suspicion by taking an oath. So this is the exact opposite, right? The first version said naki means that you are clear from taking an oath, so you don't have to take an oath. Here it means you are clear with an oath. You clear your name by taking an oath. So then even the husband himself can make her take a vow. Another formulation. Shalach Rabbi Zakai lemor ukva. Ben de lo shibu'ah. Ben de naki shibu'ah. Ben de lo neder. Ben de naki neder. Ben chasai. Hu eno yachol lahashbi'ah. So Rabbi Zakai told Mor Ukva that doesn't matter if you say no oath or clear from oath, no vow, clear from vow. Those are all the same. The key is, what is the object that you're putting it on? If you say, no oath regarding my property, then the husband cannot make her take a vow while he owns it, because he said my property. Aval yoshin mashpinota. But the heirs can, because at that point it's not the husband's property anymore, it's the heir's property. So once it transfers ownership, the waiver does not apply. However, if the husband said min nichsaya ilen, no oath regarding this land, Ben hu ben yorshav en mashprinota. Then it doesn't matter who owns it. It applies to the land itself, no matter what, and therefore both he and his heirs cannot make her take an oath. Good. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shemuel Mishum Abba Shaul ben Ima Miriam. Rav Nachman, the second generation Amorah, said the name of Shemuel, the first generation Amorah, who said in the name of Abba Shaul. There is a Tana named Abba Shaul, but this is probably not the same person, because this person has another lineage that's somewhat unusual to make a lineage after a person's mother. But sometimes when a person, either their father was out of the picture or their mother is very prominent. So this is Abba Shaul. Abba would be like saying sir, a honorific. And Ima Miriam, Ima is also probably like saying madam, also an honorific. Okay, so this person, Abba Shaul, seemed to be before contemporary or before Shemuel. So he's right on the balance of being a Tana, a late Tana, or an early Amorah. Okay, in any case, he says the name of Shemuel. Shemuel says in his name, Ben de la Shibua, Ben de Naki Shibua, Ben de la Neder, Ben de Naki Neder, Ben Menechasai, Ben Menechsaya Ilen. He says all the formulations you said up until now don't matter. It doesn't matter if you say no vow or clear from vow. It doesn't matter if you say my property or this property. Ben Hu, Ben Yoshev, and Mashpirin Ota. All those formulations mean that he's not going to make an oath and his heirs cannot take an oath. That's what they have in mind. אבל מה אעשה? שהרי אמרו חכמים, הבא להיפרע מנכסי יתומים, לא ייפרע אלא בשבועה. However, Abba Shaul says, what can I do? I would say that no one can make her take an oath. That's what it means. No oath. Clear from oath. It doesn't matter if you say this land or that land. It all has the same intention. That right. The idea is that he says you don't have to take an oath ever. But even though that is what the meaning is, there's an overriding principle that the sages said that if anyone wants to collect from orphans, if there's an outstanding debt, or a wife wants to pay a ketubah, cannot be paid unless they take an oath. That was a decree that the rabbi said to protect the money of the orphans. So since that's a preceding law that overrides the oath waiver. So even though the husband said you don't have to make an oath, but it doesn't apply to the orphans ever because of that overriding principle. Okay, Vika de Amrila Matnita. This whole statement that we just said is repeated exactly word for word, except that now it's a Baraita. Abba Shaul ben Ima Miriam Amar. In other words, not Shemuel saying it in the name of Abba Shaul, but rather an independent Baraita, which would mean now we're considering Abba Shaul for sure to be a Tana. He said, Ben de lo shiwa, ben de naki shiwa, ben de lo neder, ben naki neder, ben menechasai, ben menechasaya ilen, ben hu, ben yorsha, ben nashbi'inota. So once again, all of these formulations mean that his intention is, not he, not his heirs, can give an oath. Aval, but there's an overriding principle that anyone who wants to collect money from orphans has to make an oath, and so the wife will have to make an oath. Oath. Period. That's the end of the Baraita. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shemuel halacha keben ima Miriam. And regarding this Baraita, Rav Nachman said in the name of Shemuel, halacha is like Abba Shaul ben Ima Miriam. So this is the same as the first, just the first, it's Shemuel quoting it directly. Here we're quoting it as an independent Baraita, and then Shemuel saying, yes, halacha is like that Baraita. All right, so now we already introduced this concept, but now here is the source. Hapogemet ketubata, a woman who impairs her ketubah. She lessens its strength. How? We're going to see. Loti para ela bishpoa. When she wants to collect it, she has to make a vow. Normally, she doesn't have to make a vow because look, she has a document. But when she impairs it, then she has to. Or edechad meidashi peruah, or it gets impaired not by her but by one witness. One witness comes and says this ketubah was paid. Well, in that case, the husband says, "Look, I have one witness." Now, if he has two witnesses, case closed. One witness is not quite strong enough to close the case, but it is strong enough to require her to make a ketubah. Lo tipara ela bishbuah. She cannot get paid unless she vows. Menichsei yatomim u'menechasim meshubadim ve'shelo befanav lo tipara ela bishbuah. And now the third case, if a wife wants to collect money from the orphans, or actually anyone who wants to collect money from orphans, or if she's going to collect from a land that had a lien on it, and that land was sold to someone else, so she has to go repossess it from the buyers. Or if the husband is not in town, which that would be a case where the husband gave a get to his wife and then left. Right, he went to another country immediately afterwards before he paid the ketubah, and she comes and she wants to have the ketubah paid, but he's not around. In all these three cases, she has to make a vow, right? Because the husband isn't there, the litigant isn't there directly, and she's dealing with some third party. So she has to make a ketubah. She has to make a shivuah. Good. Now the rest of the Mishnah is going to explain each of these cases. It's actually quite an elaborate explanation, unusual for the Mishnah. That's usually much more terse. So, okay, hapogemet ketubah kata kesad. The first case of an impaired ketubah, what does that mean? Hayta ketubata elef zuz v'amad la hitkabalt ketubatich. The ketubah was worth 1,000 zuz, and he says, I already paid you all 1,000. V'yomedet lo hitkabalti ela maneh. She says, no, you only paid me 100. Lo tipara ela bishpu'ah. So then she cannot collect unless she makes an oath. This is seems to be an application of the principle of modeh b'miksat. Anytime someone claims, hey, you owe me money, but they admit that part of it was paid, so they're admitting partial, but they think that they admit partial payment, they have to make a vow to pay the rest. If the other party says, I already paid you the whole thing. The Gemara will ask if this is in fact a deoraita shivuah under that category. Okay, that's the first case. What's the case of one witness that says it was paid? Hayta ketubata elef zuz, v'amar la hitkabat ketubatich. If the ketubah was 1,000, and the husband said, I already paid you the entire 1,000. V'yomedet lo hitkabalti. She says, I didn't get any money, zero. But then one witness comes and says, you were paid the entire amount. Lo tipara ela bishpu'ah. So if she makes an oath, then she can collect the rest. So the oath is strong enough to counter the one witness. Menechasim meshubadim kesad. How would the lien property case work? A man, the husband, sold his land to someone, and now she comes to collect her ketubah, and he doesn't have money on hand, so she can go to the purchasers and say, sorry, I had a prior lien before your purchase, and she can collect it from them. If she does that, lo tipara ela bishwa, she has to make a vow before she can take it from that third party. Menichsei yatomim kesad, what will be the case of heirs? Met v'iniach nechasav litomim, if he died, and now the property goes to his heirs, let's say his sons. V'nifrat mina yatomim, and she wants to collect from the heirs. Lo tipara ela bishvuah, she has to make a vow. This is the law that Abba Shaul was referring to, that you always have to make a vow to collect from heirs. V'shelo befanav kesad, what will be the case of where he's not around? Halach lo al medinat hayam, he's still alive, so it doesn't go to his heirs. He owns it. It's but he gave her a get, and then he skipped town, and so now she is coming to make a claim on his property. He's coming to the court, and so whoever is in charge of administering his property while he's gone, she would have to make an oath to them. If she makes an oath, then she has to make an oath in order to collect her money when the guy is not around. And last statement of the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol zeman shi tobat ketubata, היורשים משביעין אותה, ואם אינה טובת כתובתה, אין היורשים משביעין אותה. He says something we'll have to explain later, that anytime she comes to claim her ketubah, then the heirs can make her take a vow, but if she does not make a claim of her ketubah, then they cannot make her take a vow. Well, the Gemara will explain. Alright, we begin. Savar Rami bar Chama lememar, שבועה דאורייתא, תקטעין 200 וכמודה לבמאה. So Rami Bar Chama suggested that this oath of a woman who admits to receiving partial payment, that is a deoraita oath, because it's the same as any case of modeh b'miksat, right? If someone's claiming 200 and admitting that they already got 100, so that was modeh b'miksat. Havyaleh hoda'a b'miksat hatana v'chol modeh b'miksat hatana yishaba. That's a Torah law that they would have to pay, that would have to make a vow, and so this would be an application of it. That's what Rami Bar Chama thought to say. However, Amar Rava shte teshuvot badavar. Rava says no, it's impossible that this is a deoraita vow, for two reasons. Chada de kol nishba'in shebat Torah nishba'in velo mishalemin. One rule is that all the oaths that are required in the Torah are oaths that one would make a vow and not have to pay. In other words, it's an oath given by the defendant. The plaintiff comes and says, you owe me money, and the defendant can make a vow and get out of paying. Whereas here, it's the wife. She's the plaintiff. She's trying to extract money, and here it says that she can take a vow and extract money. That can't be. Therefore, that proves that it's not a Torah oath, it's a D'Rabbanan oath. Right? She's vowing and receiving, and not vowing and not paying. So that's rule number one. Ve'od en nishba'in al kefirat shibud karkaot. There's no vow in any case that is regarding land or a lien on the land. So if the same case of modeh b'miksat, right? I say I paid you already 10 fields, and you say, no, you owed me 10 fields, but you only paid one, but you owe me 9 more. So that's also a case of admitting to partial payment, but if it has to do with a field, then there's no biblical oath regarding fields or any loan that has a lien on a field. Also, there's no Torah oaths. And for those two reasons, Rava says, it has to be D'Rabbanan elamar Rava mid-D'Rabbanan. And why did the rabbis require her to take an oath? Tepara dayik. Because usually someone who is paying is very precise. They remember exactly what they paid. So that's the husband here. He surely remembers. If he paid, it makes sense that he remembers exactly how much he paid, because it's painful whenever you have to take out money and pay someone. You have to think, okay, do I have enough money? Can I pay the whole thing? So you're going to remember exactly. Dimi para ladayek, but the one who gets paid is not always so precise about the exact amount, right? It's just, you don't have to go through that pain of having to take out money and give it. You're just receiving it, and you may have forgotten if it was a part of it or the entire amount. And so maybe she, the wife who's getting paid, when she received something, she didn't remember precisely if it was the full payment, and she remembers partial payment. So we're going to make her take a vow, so that she'll be precise. She'll go back, check her bank records, and remember exactly how much she got paid. And so that's the reason for the vow. Okay, good. The question was asked to the sages, if a woman impairs her ketubah, but she has witnesses. So the man says, I paid all $1,000. She said that you paid only 100, and there are, in the presence of witnesses, here are the witnesses that say that you paid that 100. They saw it. So in that case, does she have to make a vow to collect the rest? So on her side, it would seem not, because if indeed he paid the entire amount, he would have paid with witnesses, just like he for sure paid the first 100 with witnesses. Everyone agrees to that. Shows that he likes having witnesses, and the fact that he doesn't have witnesses for the other 900 supports her claim that she wasn't paid, and therefore she should not have to take a vow. Or maybe it just happened to be that there were a couple of people around. So when he was paying her the first 100, he says, oh, hey, these guys are here. Come look at this. And so fine, there was witnesses. But he didn't actually go out and make sure that there were witnesses. And therefore, we cannot assume that she's right. And she does have to make a vow for the rest of the 900, and the witnesses being there for the first 100 does not add anything to her claim. That's the question. We're going to try to answer it, but it won't be successful. Tashema. This is a Mishnah in Masechet Shavuot. Here's the principle we saw earlier, that any Torah oaths are required by the defendant, that they will they vow, and that way they will not have to pay the plaintiff. But these, the following, are all rabbinic oaths in which the person who vows also is the one that collects. Ha-sachir, a hired worker who is making a claim against the employer, saying, hey, you didn't pay me, and so he makes an oath. Ha-nigzal, someone who is stolen from. That would be a case where he can prove that this thief stole something, but the details are not proven, so he makes an oath about exactly how much he has to pay. Nechbal, someone who was injured, again, where there must be some proof that he was injured by this particular person, but he makes a vow regarding the details of how much he is owed. Ukshenegdo hashud ala shebu'ah. Or in the case where one person has to make an oath, but that person who normally would have to make an oath and not pay is suspect. He's not an honest person, and therefore the rabbis in that case can flip the obligation of the oath from the person who is paying to the person who is trying to collect, and saying, listen, that guy, normally he would pay and he would make a vow and not have to pay. But since we don't trust him anyway, if you want your money, you make the vow and then we will make him pay. We saw a case just like this above. Chenvani al pinkaso, if there's a storekeeper who's owed money and he has it written in his notebook, so he can take a vow so he can collect money. The exact details of these cases there's lots of commentary on, but we'll just explain them simply here. Hapogem shetaro shelo be'adim, and the last one is our very case. Someone who impairs his contract, could be talked by anyone in any loan contract, but we can apply it here also to a ketubah. Someone who, let's say a woman, who impairs her ketubah without witnesses. She says, I admit that you paid me 100, but not the rest of the 900. So if there's no witnesses, then she would have to make a vow, and she collects. So we can infer from this Mishnah, shelo be'edim in, she has to make a vow when there's no witnesses. Be'edim la, but if there are witnesses to the 100, then she does not have to make a vow, because she can claim, look, so you always pay with witnesses, and the rest of the 900 there was no witnesses, so no vow is needed. So it seems we can answer the question based on this Mishnah, but then we reject it. Lami baya kama, not necessarily. Maybe the Mishnah is saying a case where that is the bigger chidush, and all the more so our case. Lami baya be'edim. I don't even need to say a case where there are witnesses, that for sure you would need to make a vow. But if there's no witnesses, I might have thought that, look, he says, I paid everything. She says, she admits of her own free will. There's no witnesses around. She comes and says, actually, you paid me 100, but not the other 900. She easily could have said, no, you owe me the whole 1,000, and she would have collected without a vow. So therefore, her admission that she got paid 100 is like she is returning a lost object to him, that he wouldn't even be able to prove. Therefore, we might have thought that she should be able to collect without an oath when there are no witnesses. That's why this Mishnah says, even if there's no witnesses, she still has to make a vow. All the more so where there are witnesses that will prove that she received the 100, and that she could not have hidden that fact. So that impairs the ketubah, because it shows that there was some payment going on here, and so we might have thought that then in that case she would have to make a vow. So for sure not. If in the case where there's no witnesses, she has to make a vow, even though she would be believed totally, then all the more so she would have to make a vow when there are witnesses to that partial payment. And so there's not necessarily a proof from this Mishnah. Okay, next question. A man says, I paid you the whole thing. She says, you paid me 100 in very tiny installments. And she has a record. On this date, you gave me half a penny. On this other date, you gave me another half a penny. And she has everything so meticulously recorded, even down to something that is a very tiny amount. So what do we say in that case? Does she still have to make a vow? Do we say, look, she's so meticulous. Remember, the whole purpose of the vow was because sometimes when someone receives money, they're not so careful to remember or to record what they received. But this woman obviously is very, very meticulous. Or do we say maybe she is deceiving us? She just made up some records of every little bit, but she just made them up in order to show as if she's so meticulous. But actually, she's tricking us, and we leave that question standing. Next question. What if instead of the man says the ketubah was 1,000, I paid you all 1,000, and she, instead of coming and saying that you paid me 100, she said actually you only owed me 900. So she reduces the total amount of the ketubah, right? Even though in the ketubah document you might read it and it says 1,000. No, we agreed on 900. She's admitting to that. So what about that? Is it the same? Same thing. Either she says you paid me 100, you owe me another 900, or she says you initially only owed me 900. It's the same thing, and it impairs the ketubah. Or do you say when she says you paid me 100, then she's admitting to partial payment? Usually, when there is some payment, there's a good likelihood that there is more payment, and that's why she has to make a vow. But in this case, she is not admitting to any payment at all. She's just saying the original amount was less than you thought. That's the question. Let's try to answer it. Tashema. Pochetet tipara shelo bishvuah. Here, Braita says that if she reduces the amount, she can get paid the rest without a vow. Kesad, how would this case be? Haita ketubata elef zuz. If the amount was 1,000 originally, written in the ketubah. Ve'amad la hitkabalt ketubatech, and he says, I paid you the entire amount. Vehi omeret, lo hitkabalti ve'na ela manes. He says, I did not get paid anything, but by the way, you only owed me 100 altogether. So she can get paid without a vow. So in fact, she does not have to make a vow in this case. Now we ask about this case. How is she collecting anything? She's collecting on the basis of this contract, of this ketubah. This ketubah is a shard of earthenware. It's worthless because she just admitted that even though it says 1,000, it's not true. So she just nullified the entire ketubah, and it's only worth the paper it's written on. So how could she use it to collect? Rava explains this, where she says, we had trust between us. Now, he originally wrote a ketubah for $1,000, very nice of him. And then she said, no, it's okay, I don't need it, let's just make it 100. And they had an oral agreement, and says, we trust each other, and he didn't bother to demand that I rip up the ketubah, because we trusted each other. And therefore, well, I guess that trust was lost during the course of the marriage, because at the end, he doesn't want to pay her anything. But she is still honest, and she says, no, we agreed orally to 100, but he didn't pay anything. So in that case, she does not have to make a vow, and she can collect the entire amount without a vow. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.